All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the workshop to Intro to Git as well as version control. So before we get started, as for who we are, my name is Alan, and I'm the current nwHacks Logistics Director, and I'm a fifth-year student studying biochemistry and computer science. And joined with me is Byron Wang, the current HackCamp Logistics Director, as well as another fifth-year student studying microbiome and immunology, as well as computer science. As for the TAs that will be helping out with the workshop, we have Donald Lee, the dev coordinator, Linda, the engagement director, Melvin, the dev director, as well as Sammy, an nwHacks coordinator. So for this workshop, what to expect, we'll be going over the basics of what Git is. We'll be teaching you how to set up Git as well as GitHub. We'll be creating a repo or project. We'll be teaching you the basics of adding, committing, as well as pushing changes. And we'll be telling you about branches as well as PRs or pull requests. So I know a few of these terminologies might be a bit confusing, but hopefully as we progress through the workshop, you'll be able to familiarize yourself with these terms. All right, so let's imagine this. You and your team are excited for HackCamp and want to make a project. As a team, you decide that you want to create a portfolio website for our mascot Nugget. Super excited, you split up the work and you each go off on your own ways. So you work endlessly for the entire hackathon, but with 1 hour left, you all come together and try to combine your code together. However, to your disappointment, it just doesn't work at all. And that's because some people have accidentally implemented the same section, overwriting each other's work. And also the code is just not compatible with each other. As a result of this poor communication, your team is unable to fix everything in time and fails to submit a project. So what you just saw here was a super inefficient way of collaborating. There was no way to track who did what, and trying to connect everything back together proved to be a nightmare. If you're worried that you might run into something similar this weekend, then fear not, because that's where Git comes in. So let's talk a bit about what exactly is Git and how does this address the problem. So Git is a version control system, which basically means that it helps you manage your files. When you build projects and work on software, you normally don't just start from scratch and end up in a final product in one go, but rather you work in small steps, and with each edit you make, you create sort of snapshots of your work. That way you'll have records of all the intermediate steps that you took in order to get to that final product. Git also allows for easy collaboration, so we'll be showing you more in the workshop, but with branches as well as pull requests, people can actually work on the same project without worrying about overwriting each other's code or breaking the project. And finally, GitHub is the website that actually helps maintain your projects or repositories. All right, so as for the prereqs to the workshop, if you haven't done so already, you can scan the QR code. If you're watching the recording, then feel free to scan it. If it doesn't work, I'll be basically explaining what the prereqs actually are. So we need to make sure that we've installed Git. We need to make sure that we have a GitHub account, as well as a code editor like Visual Studio Code that we have opened up right here. So to check that we've actually installed Git properly, you can open up a terminal, and through Visual Studio Code, you can do so by dragging up from the bottom. And then we can type in the command seen on screen here of git -- version. Entering it will let you see what version of Git you had. So basically this tells you whether or not you've actually successfully downloaded it, if it shows like a Git version followed by a number. And I want to preface that learning how to code is best done through hands-on experience. So we encourage you to follow along on your own computers, and please let us know if you have any questions. If you're watching this recording, well, if you have any questions,
The internet.
yes, seek the internet.
All right, so let's go over exactly what we're going to be creating today. So we are going to be creating a personal README project or a personal README repository. So README files are simple documents in a project that kind of explain what the project is about, how it works, and how to use it. So what we'll be making today is kind of like an about me page that shows up every time someone clicks on your profile. And you can use this as a way to include any cool facts about yourself or just anything that you want other people to see when they actually go on your profile. So attached here is an image of mine. We're going to be creating something similar for you. The first step is actually making sure your code editor is configured with your actual GitHub account. So you could use these commands on screen. You could type in the terminal like what we did with the Git version part, or the better way that I like to do it is actually using the Visual Studio Code interface. So I'm going to do that really quick. You should have Visual Studio Code open, and if you click on this little icon right here, you should either see sign into sync settings or something about iCloud something. But if you click on it, you should get prompted with these two things. Sign on the GitHub or sign on Microsoft. We're going to sign on the GitHub. So let's click sign on the GitHub. All right, let me quickly fix slides real quick. Okay, so we just signed in with GitHub, and you can see if we click on this now, it should say your GitHub username. So mine is Byron93. And now we know that we're signed in with GitHub. We could have also done it this method by typing this in the terminal, where this would be your GitHub username and this would be your email for your GitHub account. But pretty much what we're doing is we're making sure that any code changes that we do are directly tied to your GitHub account. So the next step, now that we have our VS Code configured with our GitHub account, is actually creating the repository or the project. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our GitHub. So this is my GitHub, and yours should look something super similar. I'm just on my profile right now. If you click on your profile right here. So if you're here, you want to go to repositories. And you want to click this green new button right here. So if you click on that, it'll prompt you to create a new repository. And for today, our README repo or project, you're going to want to name it exactly what your username is. So since my username is ByronWang93, that's what I'm going to call it. And after you do that, you should see something like this where GitHub tells you that this is a special kind of repository, which is good. You should see that. If you don't, double check your username. You got to spell it right. And aside from that, the only other thing you want to do is this add a README file. You want to initialize this repository with one. So click it and you're good. So pretty much username equal to the repository name and then select the README file. And like I said, a README file is pretty much a document that explains what the project is about. So we're just by default including one. Once you have that done, you can just create a repository. And you should be brought to the repository page where now it just says hi there and you've created your repository. Good job. So the next step is actually, we have a repository on GitHub now. What we want to do is we want to actually use our code editor and we want to edit it. So what we want to do is we actually want to do something called cloning the repository, or basically copying the repo from GitHub into somewhere like your desktop, let's say. So I want you to go back to your GitHub repo page, click on this green button code, and copy this right here. So just click this and it should be copied. And if you go, I'm going to switch this here. So if you go back here, we're going to make use of the terminal now. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to enter the command cd desktop. You can click tab to autocomplete and click enter. And right now we should be on the desktop. So what I just did is, if you're not familiar with like how the terminal works, it's pretty much a way of navigating through your computer's files without actually using the normal interface. So I can give you a quick example. Like if you go to your Finder, if you're on Mac, or just any like file system on your computer, you can often see like stuff like this, where you might click if I want to go to my desktop, let's say I'd click on users, click on my name, and then I'd click on desktop, right? And pretty much that's what we're doing here, where cd is a command called change directory. And we're saying that we want to go to the desktop directory or the desktop folder. So it's essentially the same thing that we just saw here. It's just that there's no physical buttons that we're doing. We're doing all the commands through these terminal commands right here. So that's essentially what we're doing for the cd. So we are now in the desktop, which is what you can see right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to clone our repository there. So we can write git clone and then copy and paste the URL of your GitHub repository and then click enter. And now it should be cloned. So if you go to your desktop, you should now see a repository that is the same as your GitHub username right here. All right, so the next step is we actually want to open this file in VS Code and actually make an edit. So for this, I'm going to get off full screen real quick. And we're going to want to open this repository. So you could always just click open, which will let you navigate through your files. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to where we have it on the desktop and just simply drag it into Visual Studio Code. So drag it in. And now we have this repository open because if you see on the left-hand side, we have the README file, which is essentially what you see on the GitHub page. Hi there. Right here. All right. So I'm going to quickly make a change. So let's say like, hi there, my name is Byron. And make sure you save your changes at all times. So Command S on Mac, Control S on Windows. For Linux, it should be something super similar. And I've saved my changes. That's cool. So next up, what we're going to talk about is Git stages, because right now, all the changes that we've made here are on our own computer right now. So even though I've saved it, if you go to the actual GitHub repository and you, let's say like you refresh it, you don't see the words, my name is Byron right now. And that's because all of our changes are right now local to our own computer. It's only on our computer. But we're going to utilize Git stages to make sure that our changes that we just made are actually reflected on the GitHub repository URL. So I'm going to explain to you 3 Git stages. The first one is add. And pretty much what that does is it selects the files that you've changed that you want to include in the next snapshot of your project. And when I say snapshot, that brings me to the next stage, which is committing, which are pretty much exactly what I just said. They're just snapshots. They're kind of snapshots of your project at specific periods of time. And they kind of act as like meaningful checkpoints almost. So after you have these snapshots or these checkpoints that you have determined, the last stage for Git would be pushing, which is actually making sure that pushing these checkpoints or commits to make them actually visible on the GitHub page. So I know that was a lot of words, and we're gonna quickly demo that. So what we want to do is we want to open up the terminal again. So we can drag a terminal up real quick. And if you ever want to see like which files that you've changed, you can just see this little blue 1 icon. This will just tell you any files that you've actually changed. So you can imagine that like if you have a project with like 100 files and you only change 2 files or only edit 2 of them, you're only going to see those 2 edited files in this changes column. So what we want to do first is we want to actually add this file because we want to include this file in the next commit or the next snapshot. So what we're going to do is we're going to write git add, and you can either write the name of the file, or if you have a lot of committed files, you can just write git add period, which just adds any changed files to the next commit. So git add period, click enter, and you'll see that now we've selected README as one of the files that we want to select in the next checkpoint or commit of our project, and now it's in staged changes. So next, we're going to finalize this commit. So we're going to write git commit -m and then a message explaining what the commit is about. And in our case, we added our name. So we can say added my name. It can be honestly anything. You mainly use it to describe what you just did. And we just added our name. So click enter for that. All right, so now we've added that as a checkpoint of our code. But if you go to our GitHub, you should see that it still doesn't say my name is Byron yet. So the last step is actually pushing that commit that we just did onto our GitHub repository. So if we write git push now, that blue icon is gone. And then if you go back to our GitHub and you refresh the page, now you should see my name is Byron. So we've pushed our code from our computer onto the actual GitHub repository or project. All right, so if you weren't following along and you were just listening, now it's your turn. You can pause this video if you haven't done so already, and I want you to try editing your README file with anything that you want and add, committing, and pushing your code. So I'll let you pause that if you haven't done so. But in the meantime, we're going to move on.
And so this brings us to our next topic of branches. So pretty much in GitHub, branches are like separate workspaces for developing and testing new features. And this is done without worrying about messing up the main project. So let's say that you want to try and add a new feature, but you worry that in trying to add this new feature, you might accidentally break the entire project just by you playing around with the code. And so this is where you would use branches. You would essentially create a branch as a separate workspace. You would then move to that separate branch, do your changes there, and then once you're happy with the edits, you would then merge it back into the main project. So to help you understand better, here is another example. Let's bring back the example that we're at a hackathon, and for our project, we decide to build a portfolio website for one of our mascots, Nugget. So as a group, you want to be time efficient and you decide to split up the work. So you and your teammates want to work on the code at the same time, but you don't want to face the problems by editing the same code file or by stepping on each other's toes and just messing up the project. So this is where branches come into play. So every single repo or project has a centralized branch called the main or master branch, and this is pretty much the main workspace of the project. This is also the one that all the other branches will be using as a template. So let's say that the main branch right now just has an intro section about Nugget. So that's the picture as well as the words of "Hi, I'm Nugget." And as a group, we decide that we want to add some features to this website. So we want someone to work on a nav bar at the top. We want someone to add in a button in the center of the screen. We want someone to include a photo album section. And finally, the fourth member will work on adding a footer at the bottom. So what goes after this is that everyone would create their own branch using the main branch as a template. They would then transfer over to their separate branches where they can make whatever changes they want. And then when they're done, they would just merge their code back into the main branch. So let's say, for example, that the navbar person finished their work and they would then, on their separate branch, merge their changes back into the main branch. So that once we visit the main branch, we'll see that it has the intro section as well as the finished navbar. Let's say that the photo album person finished their section next. They would then merge their changes back into the main branch from their own separate branch. And then now, once we view the main branch, we'll see that we have the navbar, the intro section, with the newly added photo album section. Like before, another person has finished their work. In this case, it's the button person. So from their separate button branch, they would merge their changes back into the main branch. And once we view the main branch, we'll see that the button is now available here. And finally, the person responsible for working on the footer is now done with the footer and merges the changes back into the main branch from their respective footer branch. Finally, we view the main branch and we see the finished product. So after all these changes have been merged back into the main branch, then now on the collective main branch, you can actually view the final product.
All right, so now we're going to see branches in action in our code. So what we're going to do is we're going to firstly create our own separate branch. And like Alan mentioned, the main branch or the master branch, that's the centralized branch for the entire repository. If you're making any changes, you would typically make your own separate branch to work on. So we're going to do that. Right now, you can see that we're on the main branch. If you look in the bottom left corner, you see that this is main, and that means that we are on the main branch. But what we want to do is we want to create a new branch of our own. So bring back the terminal. I'm going to clear this terminal real quick to make it less messy. And I'm going to write git branch. And then this is where you would put the name of your branch. It's common to name your branch whatever feature you're working on. So let's say you're making a nav bar, you're going to name it nav bar. But for this case, I'm going to call it test branch. Okay, so git branch, test branch. So we've created a new branch, but now we want to actually push it to GitHub. We want to actually publish this branch. So what we're going to do is we're going to write git push -u origin and then the name of our branch. So test branch. All right, click enter. And if you ever, let's say like you didn't know what the name of your branches were, you can just always write git branch. And then it'll tell you the name of your branches in case you forgot the names. And then last but not least, we are going to actually go onto this branch. So what we can write is git checkout test branch and click enter. And now you should see that we've switched from the main branch to the test branch. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually make another edit. Let's say I realize my name is actually not Byron. I'm going to call myself Alan. So I'm going to make that change. I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to do what we just talked about with the adding, committing, and pushing. I'm not going to explain it as in depth right now since we just talked about it. So I'll do git add period to add all of them into my next snapshot. Git commit with a message. Let's say changed my name. And then push, git push. All right, so we just pushed our changes. So now it's your turn. So if you haven't already, or if you're watching the recording, you can feel free to pause, but I want you to create a remote branch from your README project. I want you to make a change and then add, commit, and push those changes. Make sure that for the next part of this demo to work, make sure that you first switch to your other branch, and then you make those changes and you commit and push those. So do not make your changes on the main branch. Make sure that you push, commit, that you commit and push your code on your test branch. So this brings us into our next point, which are pull requests or PRs. And what these are methods to propose changes from the main branch of the repository, or sorry, to the main branch of the repository. So this would allow people to merge their changes from, let's say, like their test branches to the main centralized branch in the repo. And this allows people to review and suggest edits to people's code. And this is super good because if there was no checking and play, you would oftentimes like be merging in code that was broken, let's say, or just not optimized. So it's also good just to get that second pair of eyes on it. And PRs are kind of the merge points that integrate the proposed code from your branch to the centralized main or master branch in the project. So we're going to create a pull request right now. We're going to have to go to GitHub, but something that I want to note is that we just pushed these changes. So we just pushed this name change from Byron to Alan. But if you go to our GitHub, you should see that this still says Byron, even though we just pushed it to make it say Alan. And what that is because we're seeing the main branch or the main centralized branch. However, in our test branch, that's where we made the changes. So you should see something like this where this yellow box, it says test branch had recent pushes to it. What we're going to do is we're going to click compare and pull request because this will let us make a pull request. All right, and there's quite a few things going on here, but I'm first just going to click create pull request. Yeah, so you just create a pull request. If you wanted to see like what files have been changed, you can click on files changed right here. And you can see that in our test branch, we want to merge it from our test branch to the main branch. And the difference between the two was that in our test branch, we changed the name Byron to be Alan. And that's pretty much the only change that we did. So that's pretty cool, where it clearly shows you the differences in code. If you go back in this right-hand column, this is where you would typically add people to review and look at your code and give feedback. Since this is your own personal repository, you can't actually like assign anyone to read your code, but in a hackathon or in work, this is where you would assign people to look over your code. And what we're actually going to do is, since no one's reviewing it, we're just going to merge it directly. So this is us saying that, oh, the changes in the test branch look good, and we want to merge it into the main branch. So if you merge, it says merge. So now if we go back to our code right here and click code, you should see that the changes in our test branch are now visible in our main branch because now it says Alan. Another super useful tip is that what you might see, I'm going to quickly go back to my main branch. Okay, so let's write git checkout main. And you should see that right now my main branch says Byron. But if you go back to our main branch on GitHub, it says Alan. So a super good thing to do is to always pull your code. And I'm going to explain what that means in a second, but pretty much you can see that as more people work on the project and as more people merge their code into the main branch, your main branch on your own computer is going to become outdated. So what we want to do is we want to run this code called git pull origin main. And what that does is it takes a look at your main branch, the files in your main branch, and then it looks at the main branch in GitHub, and it sees, are there any differences between these two branches? And if there is a difference, that means that your branch is outdated. So running this command will kind of make your code up to date, or it'll get your code up to date. So we're going to run that real quick. Git pull origin main and enter. And now you should see that it went to GitHub. It saw that this value was updated recently. So it updated the value in our own main branch. So now it says Alan. And now it's your turn. If you haven't already, or if you're watching the recording, you can pause it. But I want you to create a pull request for the changed code that you committed and pushed recently. I want you to approve that PR. And then I also want you to make sure that your main branch is updated. So going back to the main branch and then pulling from main. Oh, so now we're going to go over what did we learn today. So we learned that Git is a version control system that allows for easy collaboration on projects. We learned how to create a repository or project and how to clone it to your own computer. We learned how to make edits and how to push this code to the repository on GitHub. We learned about branches. And finally, we learned about pull requests or PRs. So in terms of what's next, README files or personal README files are super fun projects to personalize. And a lot of people, they spend a lot of time making theirs super unique. So I highly suggest continuing it because it honestly is a super fun project. And it is the first thing that people see when they go on your GitHub profile. So I highly recommend making that your own. So I've included some cool GitHub READMEs that you can reference and you can check out. It's this URL right here. So I highly suggest working on your README file for the future. But more importantly, you can use Git during HackCamp. So we taught you how you could potentially set up a project or a repository on GitHub with your teammates. And we also showed you how you could utilize Git to kind of work on the same project at the same time without actually stepping on each other or getting in each other's way. So here's a little cheat sheet on all the commands that we were learning throughout this workshop. You can take a screenshot of this if you're on the recording, but if you're attending in HackCamp IRL, we're going to post these in our Discord. And this will be on the nwPlus YouTube too. All right, so hopefully you learned something for Git. If you did, you should understand these memes right here. This should say main. Or here. And that's it. Thank you for listening. Follow us on social media at nwPlus UBC on Instagram. And if you're attending HackCamp 2023, we'll be posting these slides in the intro to version control. And the next workshop will be intro to Figma. So keep that in mind. But thank you all for listening.